John Gardner, our speaker today, is Professor of English Literature at Anglia Ruskin University and Dean of its doctoral school. He's a Leverhulme Research Fellow, leading the project Engineering Romanticism, which has led into this plenary lecture today. Unlike a lot of academics who do interdisciplinary work, John is rare in being fully trained in both disciplines. He straddles engineering and romanticism. Straight out of school in Glasgow, John was apprenticed to a local firm and qualified as a fitter turner and later a commissioning engineer. On the blog of his engineering project website, John writes, "Along with my PhD, my apprenticeship was the hardest thing I've ever done. We learned bench fitting, casting, CNC programming, engine assembly, fitting, grinding, hardening, milling, turning, and welding. That and cleaning toilets." John then went on to work for various places, including the nuclear industry at Sizewell B in Suffolk, and as a motorcycle mechanic for Harley Davidson in Glasgow, the latter while studying here at this university. Now, I say all this because when John talks about engineering in our period, he does so as both the brilliant literary critic he now is, and as someone who has served his time milling, turning, fitting, and commissioning across a huge array of mechanical precision engineering situations. I think it's safe to say that in terms of this combination of skills, learning, and experience, John is uniquely placed. John, as will become evident, grew up in Glasgow, and as I said, after his start in engineering, he turned to literary study here at the University of Glasgow, eventually doing a PhD with our esteemed and much-loved colleague, Professor Richard Cronin. John is editor of the newly branded Charles and Mary Lamb Journal. He's author of many articles on topics such as Burke, Byron, Hone, Hazlitt, the Lambs, Robert Wedderburn, class, radicalism, and dissent. John's monograph, Poetry and Popular Protest, Peterloo, Cato Street, and the Queen Caroline controversy of 2011, forced a new appreciation of the way that literary writing of all kinds, poetry, pamphlets, piratical presses, cartoonists, essayists, and periodicals, wrestled with, promoted, attacked, variously fashioned responses to some of the most troubled moments of the Regency period. John's most recent book, published just a few weeks ago by Cambridge, was co-edited with David Stewart and considers that most bizarrely understudied of decades, the 1830s, opening up all manner of texts and contexts for us as romanticists. I got my copy the other day. It's a magnificent book. I only read 2 pages of it. It's great. John's essay typically compares a pornographer with a Mancunian Italian engineer. I mean, every time I see John, I learn about people I didn't know existed, which is both fantastic and a bit annoying. Sorry. John is also, for those of us who can call him a friend, and hopefully by the end of this talk, I can still call him a friend, is an incredibly good citizen. He's such great counsel and so generous with his time for all kinds of people I know in this audience. And he's also someone, of course, who is taking our subject into new conversations with other disciplines. The title of his talk is Remains, Reuse and Reinventing.
JDEP.
Thanks, Simon. The nerves are upon me. Simon said I was trained here. My tutors are here. A number of them. I'm incredibly nervous. And I was also trained in this city, as Simon said, at a local firm. So in this, I'm going to talk about things that I consider texts as well. Machines and books about machines alongside literature. I'm going to try and bring the two together. And I'm also going to talk about working with museums. Places where I think we should all work, because it's through working with museums I've been able to really do a lot of the work in these romantic machines. I've been working with Pilgrim Museum on the Bones and All Cross, Cambridge Museum of Technology, but also here at the Riverside Museum, there's a cylinder from there. At the Hunterian Museum, you can see that machine, that Stirling engine, and I've been working with the Crystal Palace Museum as well. So I'm going to talk about interactions with these museums and the things that we've got, and how we might read them and use them. So, obviously, Romanticism is seen as being in opposition to industry. We've got the famous Immortal Dinner. Thanks, Lamb Society. Thanks, everybody connected with Lamb. What Keats and Charles Lamb agreed that Union had destroyed the poetry of the rainbow. And as Barbara Allen writes, we tend to think of industrialism and romanticism as an irreconcilable opposition between enemies. But as John Tresh has pointed out, romanticism and mechanism have defined the modern world. And Tresh and Mark Falkenberg, who recently wrote New Romantic Cyborgs, argue that we're still living in a romantic age, allied to romantic machines and romantic ways of thinking. And as there in Shelley as well, it was his fancy to invite men of science, wit, and learning who came to lend each other light, and that's the light that I want to view this in. Okay, so in the papers in April, there was an article saying that academics had found out that the Industrial Revolution had really happened 200 years earlier. They'd studied occupations of people, and this is what they'd found. And again, this was something that I'd heard before, 25 years ago, right here in this university in my economics history class, that the Industrial Revolution was a misnomer. It had been a gradual thing. But I'm only going to really talk about machines that were created in what we call the Romantic period, and could only have been created in the Romantic period. They could not have been created at any other time. You know, until 1775, as K.R. Gilbert points out, the majority of industry had scarcely advanced beyond the machines available by the Middle Ages. By 1850, the majority of modern machine tools had been invented. Now, I know we use different control systems for machines now. They might be computer controlled, but they're still the same principles of machines that grew up and were invented in the period we study, in the Romantic period. I'm going to talk about that a wee bit. So here are the machines that I'll talk about. The first one you see is a bone guillotine made by a French prisoner of war sometime between about 1797 and 1815 near Peterborough at Yaxley and Norman Cross. I'm going to talk about these screws that are measured at the Science Museum's storage facility in Swindon. They've got these big aircraft hangers, and they let me go in with micrometers and gauges and measure nuts and bolts and screws and bits of machines. Romantic machines that had never really been measured before. And I'll talk about that, screws. I'll talk about the cylinder, that engine. That engine's from a Scottish boat, the Comet, the first passenger ship here in Britain, which sailed in the Clyde in 1812. It could carry between 40 and 45 people to Greenock. And I'll talk finally about the Stirling engine. Again, a machine that you can see in the Hunterian Museum. It was presented to this university in 1827. It was invented in 1816 by a Scottish minister. And it's a machine that's capable of no emissions, carbon zero. It has a future. This is a romantic machine with a future because it can be operated by any heat source. And I'll talk about that towards the end. So we're used to reuse and remaking in our period. I mean, think of Southey's vision of judgment. William Hone released one just a couple of months later, Dr. Southey's new vision, and you can see the illustration there by George Cruikshank with, the Regent and the sackpot with Southey, and, hanging somebody out of the slot pail, which they said the Loyalist publications came from. At the same time, William Hone's publications were being copied by Loyalists, remade again. At the same time, again, Byron makes a version of Vision of Judgment, doesn't he? If you think about, say, Charles Lamb and his essay on the inconveniences of being hanged, published in 1812, it's reprinted in the Manchester Observer in 1819 in response to the number of executions of people who are forging money. So it's another political purpose. He talks about how barbaric it is in Britain that we hang people by the neck. We strangle them until they're dead. Even the guillotine is a cleaner thing. It's a better thing. And this is reused at that time. So, as we know, stories are not owned by anyone. They're just there to be reused for the political ends of whoever wants to take them and reuse them. That's what we're used to, that remaking and reuse and the period. I want to just emphasise the closeness that our heroes, the literary people, have with engineering. Of course, you've got George Gardner, who talks about how poets are makers, they're like engineers. He sees that similarity between them. And Robert Fulton, the engineer, he talks about how poets and engineers are really doing the same things. They're assembling components and they're putting them together to create something that will do some work. And I'll talk about work as well. Thomas Love Peacock, of course, fabulously funny comic writer, invents the first iron gunboats. And some of them take part in the first Anglo-Chinese War in 1839. He's responsible for them. He's responsible for superintending them. He's not just interested in it, he's actually responsible for iron gunboats. You've got Byron talking about his post as an engineer. And he says, excuse this engineering slang, in Don June. And I'll talk about his 40 horsepower Parson later on as well. And of course, steam engines will conduct you to the moon. Hazlitt talks about the power of literature, and literature is an engine. Boxright became a dangerous engine in the hands of power. Again, who owns the means of production? Knowledge as a kind of thing that can be owned, can use it against people, can use it towards their own ends. And I'll talk a wee bit about that as well. Other people say it, of course, Shelley, who we'll talk about more about, talks about himself as a mighty mechanist, bent with some sublime Archimedean art to breathe a soul into the iron heart of some machine portentous, strange gin. And Stevenson, we always think him as having trained in the law, don't we? Because we teach Jekyll and Hyde, and it's useful to us when we talk about arson. But Stevenson trained as an engineer. He served an engineering apprenticeship, and he thinks about if I were only a better engineer. Again, allying that engineering experience and coming from a family who built half of the lighthouses built in Scotland over a 150-year period. He links that with creating his own literary works. James Joyce, with the terrific James Joyce conference just 3 weeks ago here, Joyce thought of himself as an engineer. I am really one of the great engineers. Paul Valéry, the poet, makes a little machine. William Carlos Williams says the same thing as we move into the modern period. A poem is a small or large machine made out of words. So the literary work, the poem, is a machine capable of doing work. It's capable of transmitting power from one place to another. And if you're somebody like Shelley, you really believe that if you read his poems, you will go out and act on them. You will do something after that. There's that transference of power. But power, I like that bit in the life of Samuel Johnson, where it's written when Boswell writes, Mr. Hector was so good as to accompany me to see the great works of Mr. Bolton at places called Soho. It was such a famous factory that there it is on a 2p piece. You can see Soho right under the shield of Britannia because it was minted there. It's about 2 miles from Birmingham. I shall never forget Mr. Bolton's expression. I sell here, sir, what all the world desires to have. Power. 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 John Gardner talks about how Wordsworth could imagine the reading of a poem is a personal exchange of power between the writer and the reader. Byron also thinks about the power for a 40-power Parson, power to chant, and he has that note beneath it. He talks about a metaphor taken from the 40-horsepower engine. And a 40-horsepower engine, you'll know, is the size of a kind of typical warp-type engine in this period. But how to really understand that, what does it mean? What does a horsepower mean? To move 33,000 pounds, certain distance in a minute. No, you've got to think about it in terms of us, who we are. And we're probably capable of about 0.1 of a horsepower, kind of quite hard work, quite consistent work. So about 10 people. So 40 horsepower, 400 people. That's the kind of power in one of these engines that you'd hear around London, Glasgow, or any of the big cities. Whether it's a genuine Watt engine, you protected these pattern, or a knockoff Watt engine. That's the kind of power that was around. So try to understand that, what it means when they use these terms. You can see I've put down some other terms. You can also see here the efficiencies. Of course, Watt didn't invent the steam engine. He just improved it. And you can see we go up from 0.5% with the old Newcomer engine. You need a lot of coal. You need to actually be on a coal mine to 4.5%. And for that, Watt is celebrated, of course, and making that improvement and remaking the Newcomer engine. It repairs one and it makes it better by having a separate condenser. I'll talk to you about that. So you have this power, you have these machines, you have these technologies. This is pre-Marx, of course, who are the owners of the means of production. They can oppress you. But it's something that Shelley realises quite early on. You can make screws to bolt things together that will do some good, or you can put them on people's thumbs and torture them. That's what can happen with technology. That's what happens with all technologies. They often get taken by those in power and get used to oppress people, no matter what they are. So this is at the basis of my talk. This is where I'm coming from in this. Hubert Siemenden, when he talks about how a machine is a stranger inside which something human is locked up. And that's what I really want to emphasise, the humanity. Humanity's at the centre of the machine. They're always there. But when he talks about technical objects like nuts and bolts and screws and machines, he says culture behaves towards a technical object as a man to a stranger, carried away by a primitive xenophobia. We're frightened of the machine, we're frightened of technology. We don't understand it. And the reason we don't understand it is because of alienation. Non-knowledge of the machine is what alienates us from it. Slightly different from that alienation that Marx talks about, but one that he moves on. It's a bit non-knowledge. We don't understand the machine and machinery. And this is certainly something that spoke to me at really quite a deep level. I remember being, if I can tell an anecdote, I can remember being an apprentice in a factory, being about 17. I was in my second year and I was faced with this confusing machinery, just like a kind of wall of machinery. And I really had no idea what to do with it. And I had to work with the tradesperson on it. And I admitted, I cannot make head nor tail of this. And he said to me, a human being made this. And you're a human being, so you can learn it as well. And he put the human at the centre of the machine. And that's the important thing. I think that's why reading Siemenden, who's only recently been translated into English in the last 5 years, although this was, 1957, this was his PhD that he'd done, really spoke to me in this. You could see a Glasgow gasmet, publication that came out of the New Mechanics Institute in Glasgow, which is the Glasgow Mechanics magazine. So these were gas workers, again, brand new technology. And they're talking about how many people enjoy the things that they do and make. You know, that they enjoy the steamship, they can go and the middle classes can go out, but they do not have a clue how they're built, how they're made. But also that the very workers on it are becoming alienated from what these things do when they go out in the world, or how the components that they make get put together. And again, it's that non-knowledge that Siemenden talks about there. Bruno Latour very much follows Siemenden, and quite aggressively. You know, he talks about how he's happy for people to look down on religion, that's fine. And happy he looked down on psychology because it does more harm than good, that's fine as well. But to look down at technology, to technologists, the things that we've done, of used tools that we've used for hundreds of thousands of years, why do we look down on them? And he says, as for a technologist, we would only expect such a person to come round and repair the machine, not to teach us anything at all. So this is where it'll come from. In terms of Britain and the human, and why I think here in Britain, I really want to talk about vernacular knowledge and knowledge grown out of the workshops before it's theorised. And I think one of John Quincy Adams, when he's writing a report on weights and measures in the early 1820s in America, they're thinking about what system they're going to adopt, talks about how there's an advantage to having a measuring system based on the body, the kind of measuring system we have in Britain rather than in France, where it's this abstract 10 millionths distance to the part of the quadrant of the meridian. It's too hard to understand, what measurement is there. But with the British, there is an advantage because all of us could work out what an inch, it's kind of around about that, your thumb, or a foot, or any of that works out, or a yard, because we're already made that way. And it's a rough approximation that gives us a connection to the tools and machines that we'll make using that imperial system, using the British system. It has that advantage. And I think it has that advantage of vernacular knowledge drawn out of the individual in the workshop, rather than it being imposed by academy from above that's theorised how measurement works and is trying to impose it on you. So let's go to the first thing. So these, I call them the bones of Norman Cross, and these are artefacts that I first saw in Peterborough Museum around 12 years ago. I was visiting there and I went into the basement and they said, we've got all this collection from the Napoleonic Wars. We had the first purpose-built Napoleonic, first purpose-built prisoner of war building here. It was built in 1797. It was prefabricated. The panels come up from London. And I think something like 200,000 prisoners passed through it. It was a massive 800,000 prisoners as a whole were in Britain at various times during the Napoleonic Wars. And they showed me these artefacts. So the thing they've mainly got are bowing guillotines. They've also got spinning jennies. They've got domino boxes. They've got watch holders, which I never knew existed. Like mantelpiece watch holders. It must have been custom made. You would, if you were rich, you had a fob watch and you would take it out during the day. It's a bit like leaving the house and saying, I'm turning off the heating. Turn off the heat and I'm going out. It's like I'm taking the time with me, because you would take it out of your watch holder and leave with the time if you were rich, and then come back in and you give your family the time back again by putting that. I never knew it existed until I saw these made out of bone there. And I said to them, why did they make them? These are very intricate things. And they said, well, it must have been quite dull here. It must have been really boring and a base for their well-being. And they'd someone displaying it said, it was dull and this is for well-being. But I cannot believe that at all. I can't believe that. And the further we looked into it, we saw that these could cost quite a bit of money and that they were being sold in the local markets around Peterborough. And I think there was a kind of dark consumerism at work where it's like, I'm going to buy a bone guillotine from a French prisoner of war, something that symbolises, France and what we've been fighting against at the same time. So how did they make them? Well, examining a few of them, I can see that they must have used variously skilled people in the camp. They would get about a pound of beef a day each. Quite a lot. They'd get a pound of potatoes, a pound of veg, a pound of beef, and a pound of bread a day. They were really well fed. So I thought, what's the driver here? Why are they doing this? And they would gather up the beef bones and sometimes mutton. And sulphur was used to clean the latrines and things. We think they probably bleached the bones using sulphur. And from that, they would carve them up into sections and they would make these very intricate things. And these guillotines, they would actually work. They would use hair a lot of the time because they had no other materials. What they did is they made things out of scraps, just whatever scraps were there. Nora Crook managed to buy a box in 1969 you bought it, Nora? A bone box or something? Yeah, And you showed me an inside somebody from the period that author had written, the French soldiers made this from their dinner, inside in pencil. And this is very much use of remains. They also made things out of straw that they found, pictures made out of straw, and also really quite elaborate marquetry. Bits of waste wood and matchsticks. And there's very much that kind of circular economy going on there. They're reusing absolutely everything they've got. But what was interesting as well is how things are manufactured. So you can see a lot of things that be carved. Sometimes they'd be using small drills that they must have made themselves, the drills, to drill through this bone. And you can see here there are items that are obviously not carved, but they're turned. They've been turned on a machine. They've been turned in a lathe. So they would have made their own lathes. And these lathes would have been wee, tiny bowl lathes, they're called. So what you do is you've got two fixed points. I can show you an ancient lathe. Here's an ancient one. They get back into deep antiquity lathes. And here's one here. You're in a forest. You have to make something circular. You can use two trees and 2 points and a bit of wood and a springy branch, and you can put your foot in it and you can turn that wood and you can use a rest and you can carve it. You can make things. And when you go to like summer fairs and places, you can see people that have made, kind of very rustic lathes in that way with 2 nails. They've just put something in the middle and a rope, bungee, and they're just working it. That's the kind of thing that these ingenious, mainly French prisoners of war, would have used to make the cylindrical parts of the machines. And as I said, the lathe is a machine of antiquity. You can see this medieval image, but it's one that developed rapidly in the Romantic period. You can see here, skilled workers at work. They've got a machine turning the object in the middle between the two centres. So you've got the chuck in one end and the tailstock in the other, and the object in the middle, and the chuck turns. And you can see they're leaning with their tools on a rest. That's how the machines were around about 1750, 1760 and onwards. But if you go in the Science Museum, you can see that by 1816, there's some very sophisticated machines, like this screw cutting lathe. And this has got 2 important features that change everything, allow the modern world to emerge. One of them is this fixed tool post. And the other is what's called the lead screw that's there, that screw that runs there. This sets up a geared relationship between the turned component and the tool. You can fix the relationship between the two. And that means that we move from a point where one person has to make one nut and bolt, and it will not fit your nut and bolt or your nut and bolt. And in fact, there was an examination only very recently of the rocket, another romantic machine. And when they examined the threads in the rocket, they found that even in one machine, every single screw thread was different. Every nut and every bolt belonged to each other. The modern world could not exist without this change. That's around about 1708 in Lambeth. So we think of Lambeth and Blake, don't we? But here in Lambeth, there's also Henry Maudsley, and he comes up with this. There are competing stories about this. Obviously, it's about any invention. People breathing the same air, never talking to each other, come up with the same thing in France and in America at roughly the same time. But Maudsley generally gets credited with this amazing innovation. And that leads me to the first thing I'm going to talk about in terms of the next machine I'm going to talk about. That's Comet engine and Shelley's steam ship. I'll talk about this very briefly. Here is a cylinder, and it's one that you can go and see in the Transport Museum here in Glasgow. It's a spare cylinder for the Comet, the ship that I told you about, that 45-foot, 4 horsepower, watt-engined machine. Now, to bowl that out, you would need a horizontal borer or a lathe, and quite an accurate one. And one of the things that drove James Watt away from Glasgow down to Birmingham was the search for efficiency. He had to make that fit between the piston and the cylinder as accurate as possible, and he could not do it up here. the best factory in Britain was Matthew Boulton's and his solo works. And that's where he went to get the kind of accuracy that he needed for his machine. So this is an important engine because I'm going to argue that this is the kind of engine, and there's evidence through using our literature of superpower, of close reading, where we can see what kind of engine that Shelley was going to use. I'm going to argue it was that kind of engine. And there is the comma engine with its maker. And you can see that engine in the Science Museum in London. So we've got a cylinder here, the spare cylinder, and the engine is in London at the Science Museum. So, as Mary Shelley said, Shelley, around about 1819, decided he was going to build a steamship with engineer Henry Reevely, and it was going to go between Livorno and Marseille. And she says it was puerile vanity. This was because he was really interested in building a steamship and engaging in business. I think also Isabella, the reasons that Peacock went into creating steamships as well. It's about communications. It's about speeding up communications. It's about getting his radical poetry to his audience as quickly as possible, and the steamship can do that. I mean, if you think about Peacock and the ships to India, it went from, I think it was one every 6 months, it would take a year, to only a month after that, or 6 weeks. It's very quick once you can get the steamship and you didn't need to worry about the winds. So this is what he wanted to do. And also on the steamships of the time, around about 1819, there would be literature on them. You've got a very captive audience there who have to read whatever's on that steamship, and you can see in some of the bills that they're full of books and broadsides and things like that. So here's his sketch. We don't know, or we didn't know, what his steamship would be like. We just know he was trying to make one. And here he's got this sketch. We can see it's a paddle steamer. See a bit of a sail there. And that's in his notebook. It looks a bit like the kind of thing you'd have seen in Rees's Cyclopedia, which we know he read, published in 1819. But if we read his letters closely, we can work out what kind of engine it is. But as you can see here, he talks about the steam cylinder and air pump. Now, because we know it's got an air pump, it's a Watt-type engine, because the advance that Watt made was to cool the exhaust steam away from the cylinder. He put in a condenser. And when you put in a condenser, you need an air pump. So we know from that it's a Watt-type engine. And indeed, they would be the most common sort that they use because they could be the smallest as well. So that's one thing we can work out from reading that. I've put a schematic at a Watt-type. It's a double-acting Watt-type engine below there. That's the kind that would be in the common. By double-acting, I mean that steam would be directed underneath and at top, depending on the stroke. Different from the Newcomen engine and the early Watt engines where they used to be uncovered at the top of the piston when they relied on atmospheric pressure. You can also work out how it was driven as well. And here we get a link to the Comet. Because when he talks about how one might imagine God, so he's looking at the casting of the cylinder, and it's probably in a bell foundry in Italy. It's the only space I can kind of think of where it could be done. And it sounds like that. We don't exactly know where it was cast. But he said it's a great thing, the successful casting of the cylinder, the kind of cylinder you just saw. He said, your volcanic description of the birth of the cylinder is very characteristic of you. One might imagine God when he made the earth. And he talks about it like the tail of a comet and machine spinning around the sun and about having taken out packs to supply all the suns and space. So like the tail of a comet, the comet in 1812 was named after Comet Tralles, which had been the previous year, 1811. Plus the comet in 1819, forget the name of it, but it's the one that Blake draws in his Solar Flea. Actually, you can see that in there from that late Blake. But also, I think the comet that's been in Glasgow, because Shelley's ship, we know the length of it, it's 45 feet. The comet was 44 feet. And for that size, and to use that engine, and having a sail as well, nearly all the ships had sails because the steam engines weren't really enough. I would say that this is based on the Comet engine. The Comet was really famous. It's a small boat, it's exactly the same size as the boat Shelley's trying to create. And I think this reference to the Comet references that earlier Comet he's thinking about. This bit about machines spinning around the sun, I think is important because, and the stuff about patents, because what really vigorously defended his patents? Eric Robinson, mate Simon, Eric Robinson said that Watt was probably as good a patent lawyer as he was an engineer. And Watt was actually reacting to a patent when he brought out his steam engine because he would have used the crank, something that had been used since antiquity to create linear movement and rotational movement. But a patent had been taken out in the crank, an opportunistic patent. So rather than go and fight against somebody else's patent, he developed sun and planet gearing. And here you can see the sun, the center, sun gear, and the planetary gear can run about it to do the same thing, to convert linear motion into circular motion. So I think that reading that, we can work out it's a Watt type engine, it's the type used in the Comet, and also probably using sun and planet gearing as well. And this, because the drawings exist, you can find them in the Mitchell Library of the Comet. It was remade in 1962 by Thomson and Kinnaird on the Clyde. And they sailed it, and I found this wee bit of film from the boat in 1962. So if you want to see with the ship that Shelley would have, if he'd finished it, if it hadn't fallen out and run out of money and everything else, that's kind of what it would have looked like and how it would have worked. That boat was at Port Glasgow until just a few months ago. And it's not long now. They took it away and just left it to rot. That boat that they built in 1962 to celebrate 150 years since the first passenger steamship. It was just left to rot and it's gone now. And I think it is probably a good thing to celebrate again in the future if anybody's got money to make a new Comet. So standards. What Shelley was doing was he was following a standard. He was reusing, he was remaking something that had been set up as a kind of working standard. And, as Jason David Hall argues, standards were a thing that people were searching for. He argues here that even in poetry, there is no universally accepted method for measuring meter. And I'm going to just leave that there for you to think about as I move into talking about threads. You've got your number of beats of line, your number of metric feet, and in the same way, in thread, you've got your number of threads an inch, you've got your beats that go along that number of threads an inch. And I'm just going to talk about that. I see parallel searches for standards in the period. I'll keep for time. Go on. 8? 10:50. We'll get through quickly. So as James Naismith says, there were no standards when it came to nuts and bolts. As I said earlier, everyone was mated to another. It was endless confusion. Everything had to be marked. Even in that Comet, they're all different. You can't interchange anything. And I went to the Science Museum archive and I looked at taps made by Maudslay in 1800. So these are romantic taps. So he's just made this machine that can then set up a relationship between the chuck and the turnpike and the tool. And what he's done is he's just engaged in a whole load of experimentation. Some of these taps have got ultra fine threads, 100 threads an inch. I don't know how he managed it. I mean, it's really remarkable. Here he's got a new machine and he runs with it. He tries to see just what this can achieve. And these super fine threads that he's got here, I mean, they could only be used for making fine instruments. You can see one of the micrometers and gauges that are used to measure them. And there is no universal standard, but what you see is workshops beginning to build up their own standards. And this is where I want to talk about vernacular knowledge and how it becomes theory. And if you think about poetic workshops and poetic craft, how that's then theorised later on. What Joseph Whitworth did is he searched around the workshops, the principal workshops, they asked them for nuts and bolts, and then he measured them. And then he took the average. He thought, if something's going to stick, I have to take the average of what already exists. So when I measured bolts in the Science Museum from that robots machine, I found that what he was using was at 12.5 threads an inch for a half-inch bolt. The Whitworth standard is 12 threads an inch. It's almost there. It's close to it. So you can see the romantic period, the kind of things happening in the workshops in the period being used to set the standards that we're still working to today. And that's something that Babbage talks about. And this is a very good read, The Economy of Machinery and Manufactures. It's really worth reading. And it was the Babbage chair at Cambridge that put me onto this. And examine the workshops first. And generally, it's neglected by the wealthier classes, as he says. And that's what Whitworth did to establish the standard. So here's another quick story then. Crystal Palace, 1851. All the machines that had been created, during our period, here's the showcase for it all. And I thought, how on earth could that have been built? How could they build this massive building in 190 days? A building so large that it would grow something like 18 inches in a hot day. How could they manage it? It to be built more cheaply per square foot than any other building constructed, and it was the largest building constructed. And I looked at the drawings, which are in Saffron Walden Library, so really close by in Cambridge, and there are about 30,000 nuts and bolts. And I thought, how could they have done this? Because there's no system. And in fact, the Whitworth system isn't set until British standards met, oddly enough, on the day Queen Victoria died in 1901, to say they were going to adopt the Whitworth system. And it's adopted in 1905. So this is over 50 years before there's a standard set. So I contacted the Crystal Palace Museum, and I said to them, have you got any nuts and bolts? They'd never had this request before, weirdly enough. But eventually, Ken Kiss, the curator there, said he'd gone into the archive and he'd found a rusty nut and bolt, and then he found another rusty nut and bolt, and he posted them to me in Cambridge. And I then spent quite a bit of time with a blowtorch and oil and all sorts, taking these rusty nuts and bolts apart. And I measured them, and I found out that they corresponded with the Whitworth standard. These were 7/8 bolts. And Whitworth had written a paper which he delivered in 1841 suggesting this standard. He suggested it, but as I said, it wasn't taken up for another 60 years as a national standard. And what it is it's a vernacular standard. It's one that comes from the workshops. So I measured it, but then I found out that there was nobody to verify the measurement. So I remade the bolt on a wee lathe. So I set it to the Whitworth standard just to see that if I made the bolt, that the original Crystal Palace nut would fit on it, and then that was the definite test. So I did that, so made the bolt, and it fitted on, and then that proved that indeed a standard had been used, and that's how it could have been built. So I won't go on too long about this. I'm going to finish up now. I talked about horsepower and what it meant, and in terms of ideals, and I think I'll finish now. Oh, it's the Crystal Palace behind. They're very happy with the nut and bolt, and they can establish something new that they never knew. So I want to move on to kind of ideals and the kind of things we're used to in Romanticism, that stretch and rewards things. And here's the potential. Here's the potential of the machines that are here, equivalent to 1.2 billion men, and this is in 1823. And this is a magazine where you'll find essays on Charles Lamb, Byron, all sorts of things. On the same magazine, monthly review, you can find something about a steam engine at the same time. They were mixed up together frequently. Here's the potential for these machines to free us from terrible, terrible jobs. And also at the same time, you can see if you look at the patent books, you can see throughout it, it's about saving fuel. It's about being efficient. It's about being economical. It's about using as few resources as possible. Moving towards these ideals of using as little as exists. And I think about Godwin at this point. Godwin talking about how, maybe we can become immortal one day. Maybe we can get to a point of evolution. There's this ideal, there's a kind of perpetual motion, if it is an ideal, I don't think it is, but there's a kind of perpetual motion and a movement towards this. And that's why I want to finish off very quickly with the Stirling engine that's here. Because this is a zero emission technology where you can use any heat source to make it work. There's no waste steam. There is no steam. It just uses a closed cycle of air. The same volume of air moves from one cylinder to another. It never changes. There is no waste. Nothing comes out of it. It could be any gas. Some gases work better than others. And the heat goes under here and it moves the displacer. It goes into the power piston and any heat source could use it. And in fact, recently it's been investigated by companies and universities to see if it can be used. One of the reasons it wasn't used so much is because it's quite a narrow power band, that more is being done in it. And you can see even here, here's one you can buy for 20 quid an Amazon on top of a tea cup, and even the heat from your tea will just make it run. Have a look. You can buy a Stirling engine that will just sit there. Any heat source whatsoever. So let me finish up then, since we've only got a few minutes. All right. I've tried to bring together what we do, close reading, literature, with the Romantic period, with the objects and machinery of the period, because they are texts, they are things that belong to us, things that need to be read and measured and examined and analysed. I think as well, it's important for us to work with museums and galleries who are struggling just now to find out about what they hold, what they've got in their archives for us and their students to go out there and examine the materials and get involved in the very powerful thing for our students of labelling and making descriptions of these things, which if you look for it, you'll find in the literature. You just need to look for it. It's already there. It's surrounded the poets and artists and novelists that we look at. If you just look in the literature, you will find it there. So I've tried to bring them together, and then quickly I've just tried to talk about 4 different romantic machines that I think speak to today, really. They speak to the theme of reuse and remaking and using what might be called refuse, and about using as few resources as possible. When Peacock wrote his 4 Ages of Poetry, he bemoaned that we were living in an age of brass. And he said the best age for poetry was that age of gold. And what they did is they celebrated the first age of iron. That's what they celebrated. But I think Peacock was too close to it to know that gold was already being produced in his own period. It was an age of brass. And what that was celebrating was this new age of iron that they were all living in and they were all surrounded by.
If I've got a question, so hand up. So I could, yeah. Sorry. Go one.
Thank you. That was great. So I had a question about AI based on your dual experience as an engineer and as a literary scholar. With the litany of quotes with which you began, you presented a fairly harmonious relationship between literary culture and technology. But I was wondering whether, what you think about large language models, where there might be a different history to trace from the Romantic period, of course, with Babbage, Lovelace, the British invention of log tables, which led to modern computing. And so in the case of large language models, overcoming non-knowledge is not so easy for the layperson because of the black box nature of a lot of the models. And the relationship between poem and machine takes on a slightly more sinister cast. I was just wondering what you make of that, this new development.
Easy icebreaker question. I think some of the same. I think that was behind some of what I was talking about here when I was thinking about Shelley saying, well, you can use a screw, put together a machine that's useful to humanity. or you can put it in people's thumbs and talk to them with it. That's technology for you. You know, Marx talks about how the owners of the means of production oppress other people. And I think if you apply Marx's thinking to AI, then we might be in a crazy period of it's possible to democratise it. And Mark Koppelberg argues that. He writes quite a lot about AI. He's a professor of philosophy at Vienna University, and he says the key thing to do now is to embrace it, democratise it, and train everybody to use it and make it open. But that period can pass very quickly, and then people control it and own it, and use it against you. So I don't know what to say. I mean, I suppose if you think about the imagination, the fancy as romanticists, AI is the fancy, isn't it? It's what's already out there. It's what already exists. It's not the imagination. It's not that creative element. It can only take what's already out there. So, don't know if that answers. It's a hard thing to think about, but I think that there are humans behind it. As Siemenden says, you know, there's a human at the centre of this technology that we're terrified of. Non-knowledge of the technology alienates us from it. It makes us even more terrified of it. And I suppose the only way to deal with it, because it exists, is, as Koppelberg says, to try and understand it, to democratise it. But what it will mean for us as literary critics,
Thank you. Thanks for the talk. I wanted to ask a question about class and education and maybe even gender in relation to being an engineer, engines and engineering. So I work in the Irish writer Mariah Edwards, and big family, and grew up in the kind of household of constant inventing. And the Edwards wanted one of the sons to become an engineer, but they have a lot of concerns about the respectability or otherwise of that as a profession. It's not like going to the law or the church, and they even talk about how there isn't even really a good word, they say, in around 1800 in English for it. You need the French word still to talk about, to be an engineer. And I was thinking just about the different kinds of types of activity that lay behind your four machines, whether they're kind of gentry or clerical figures with time on their hands, or artisanal inventors doing the incredible thread stuff you showed us. It's amazing. Or Shelley, is it just me, or is there something very dilettantish in the steamboat enterprise? And what I'm wondering is where we can kind of cross these questions of class and education, or cross between literature and the sciences.
Thanks. There's a lot there. There's a lot there. Thanks a lot. In terms of women getting an education and engineering and the sciences, we've got to look to the New Mechanics Institutes, and we've got to look to Force Mechanics class, which happened at one of the other universities in this city, which was called Anderson's Institute at Anderson's University. Anderson, a disgruntled employee of Glasgow University. I know you've never had a disgruntled employee here, but John Anderson certainly disliked the place. He said it was full of intrigue and, upmanship and all sorts. He really writes quite a lot about it, but I know that's true now, but he said it was true back in the 1790s. And he set aside money to form his own university. And when George Birkbeck, one of the first hires there, he opened up the evening mechanics class at 8 o'clock at night, and men and women attended, and you would get up to 500 people. And indeed, when the mechanics classes really took hold, and you get the first ones at Manchester, Sheffield, and London. In fact, of course, Birkbeck, what's that, 1823, 1824, again, women could attend. In terms of engineering being a respectable thing, I think in Britain, we're a class-ridden country, aren't we? In any profession where you get your hands dirty, you're automatically going to be looked down on. But saying that, engineers that we spoke about here all served apprenticeships. James Watt served an apprenticeship. James Naismith served an apprenticeship. So did Joseph Whitworth. All of these engineers, to which we owe a lot right now. I mean, even these lighting fixings up there use the Whitworth thread. It's still used today. they served apprenticeship. So I think class is absolutely bound up in everything to do with that. And when Whitworth became a noble, they were saying, it was said to look like a monkey, they didn't walk right in a suit and all this stuff, the class-based stuff quite quickly as soon as he made some money and showed himself in light company.
Thank you so much. I'm just working right now on the mechanic soul, and as I'm sure you know, at the beginning of the 19th century, mechanic and engineer were quite often used interchangeably. By the end of the century, that's not the case, and there's a whole argument on the left that the mechanic can have no soul. A person who operates the machine must undergo machinification. Massification is the term that's often used in that kind of discourse. And yet we know that literature in the very widest distribution in the 19th century was really the creation of mechanics, in the sense that they came up with all the inventions, small machines of all kinds, that enabled the cheapening of print and also the rapid distribution of print throughout the land and to almost everybody could pay. And so I want to ask about that idea about what is the constitution of the subject of the machine, of the mechanic on the one hand and the engineer on the other. Is there a difference? Since Romantic literature is very largely about a subjectivity of a certain kind, Wordsworth's kind of exemplary English subject, is there such a thing as the haptic subject? Is there such a thing? Should our project for the future be to think about the possibility of the haptic intellectual and haptic subjectivity?
Whoa. So really jumping across disciplines and that question about engineers and mechanics is a good one, and I think it's today, what the mechanic is seen as an assembler, an engineer is somebody who really wants something. Or you get the old distinction where people say, you have to have gone to university in order to be called an engineer. But as I said, none of these engineers here went to university. Personally, I like Neville Shute's. I don't know, do people read Neville Shute much? On the beach, and I like Neville Shute. I think he's a good author. He's also trained in engineering. He was involved in the 101 project. The balloons. He was an aviator. He defined engineer as somebody that could make something for $1, it cost everybody else $5 to make. He said that was an engineer. But as to sort of a broader training among the disciplines, you can see the ease that some people felt. That question about Shelley that I didn't answer, was it a dilettante thing or whatever? I think it was one of these periods where here was new technology. The steamship is only, just coming to the fore. And in fact, the first ship to go between London and Edinburgh is only, 1822? Where you've got the James Watt, and in fact, it gets into literature very quickly. It's there in Liber Amoris. Hazlitt takes that trip up to get his divorce from Sarah Stoddart on that. It's a miserable journey, but it's quicker and much cheaper than a post chase. Much quicker, and only being 2 days. So I think Shelley was serious about the boat project. I think he studied hard, he read a lot of engineering and maths, and I think he thought it was a technology within his grasp. He knew to work with an engineer at the same time. But I think, like a lot of new technologies, there's a period where people feel, okay, it's in its infancy. I can get a handle on this. And I wonder about your question, and that we might ask students to go and work with and to close read critically and analytically. Well, we're doing that kind of training as well, reading literature. Because I think that is our superpower. That is close reading. That's what makes us special. And I think that's what we could do in these other areas as well.
John, and thanks, I really enjoyed that. I like hearing about the Crystal Palace nuts and bolts and big standards. Well, and all your hard work, it may be and time like between 1850 and 1901. Like the fact that they used in practice for so long for explore guides. Made me think, how could we think about that time? Like, and Raymond Williams came to my mind, but thinking about kind of emergent cultures or even structures of feeling where something's in the air or even used in practice. It's another way, I guess, to think about vernacular knowledge. But would Williams be a helpful way of thinking about it, or is what you're doing kind of expanding what he kind of incorporated?
I think that's it's been informed by Williams's work, and I think you do get that co-option of what already exists out there and it's used. Then it's taken as if the theorists and the rule makers formulated it themselves, but what they didn't do that. They just took it and then they told everybody else that's what they must use. So yeah. Really.
Thanks so much, John. I love the laid, so I really enjoyed that.
Gracious audience.
So I'm kind of to contextualize this, but not going about what I'm doing. I've got some interns at the moment working with like 8 or 9 furniture designs, 2D, like things that have been made, and they're making them 3D, like CADing them. And they're talking about 3D, but then they have finals. But so my question is a really basic one: is like, have you made any bits? And like, I was thinking about the kind of museum engagement, the gallery engagement, and collections, how you might kind of engage with those, and also kind of get into that mindset as well. So I just
Did I make the parts? Yeah, I made them. Yeah, I made those lots of bolts. Yeah, I've got this. I make this like an old 1950s lathe, very cheaply. I made them on that. I've got the gears and I could do any number of threads an inch, so I did make them on that. So yeah, that I did make. And it was good fun. It's enjoyable. Doing that, I haven't done it for ages. And that connection with practice was good. And I think it was the only way to prove the standard. There was no other way to do it because I never had anybody else to measure it. So I think that's the way forward for a lot of this. I think we get an HRC working with Northern Cross bonds. I think that's something that we can maybe think about with the PhD student who will be working on it as well.
Who's that going to make me turn to the age? Like, I've got to be this and remove the, you've got people making the idea that maybe the separation between the kind of sexual, which there isn't at all, is happening now. Like, what do we got this kind of knowledge that imagines its stuff, having make things, and that's happened, make space to this. I just think it'll be like the so and art. Hey.
I work that and we do the one on the back. Slightly later. Okay.
Okay, so I've been excited to ask this question for a while, ever since you had that poetry slide up about the meter, because it had me wondering, without standards for versification, with the poets that we're studying experimenting so much with versification, and just now I was thinking of making Aeolian harps, because that's a thing that, romanticists have done on occasion, and you're busy building your machines. I'm wondering to what extent poets start changing their sense of meter based on the machinery around them, the way, this pulsing thing that I'm looking at on the screen right now, right? It's a response to nature, expressure. Do we start versifying as we standardize meter? Is that coming in with standardization of machines?
Yeah, again, that I always think the things we do in romanticism, the things that the modernists think are theirs are really ours, and that things about poetry, the railway lines, and about how the riding the rails it affects the meter of the poetry. I mean, Jerry Carruthers and I worked in Alexander Roger, the Glasgow poet, who also worked in a factory, and part of that was looking at. He really talks about how the machines interfere with his composition. when he's doing that at the same time. So I think there is more to be done there as we scan homes and think, well, what were the sounds in the background? And certainly the sounds in this city, out of the 1820, would be the sound of water engines, knock-off water engines, all in the city working. And how much does that affect the poetry, the beatings, double-acting engines? So yeah, I think that's it's yeah, lost.
Oh, okay, that, yeah. So I'm going to make this a little bit about Blake, but not because I wanted to ask, based on like your research, like if you found anything about what I'm going to ask. So like going from Blake's like satanic mills, which very much kind of characterizes machinery as very kind of anti creativity, anti-divine, like everything you've been saying so far is completely the opposite of that. It's like it's not exactly divinity lives in machinery, but kind of human creativity, which is kind of immortal, and like human creativity, which kind of drives everything in creation. So I was wondering if you found any kind of really quotes or examples of people like with Shelley and the kind of solar planetary gear, where machinery and like the impetus behind creating things is like divine rather than like just something that we do to make things work. Because even like the solar planetary thing, like before like Galileo and stuff, people thought that like the planet's movements were divine rather than just something that keeps like life going. So like, have you found anything where people have made like divine or kind of godly interpretations of machines? Yeah.
You see that. You see that on actually the travel guides. You see it in some of the shipping timetables where they talk about this as being, and then you see it, of course, the Victorian period where you see the pumping stations that look like cathedrals. You know, they've really, you know, you visit them and you see that just how much that they've put into it as something reaching towards God, and that's something that actually Neville Shute goes in there about how there's almost a kind of religious aspect to the pursuit of engineering. You know, the pursuit of perfection, which all engineers know is impossible. You know, even if you have a machine churning out a million identical nuts and bolts, they've all been through their own tiny process of individuation. They're all slightly different. They might look the same, you might measure them the same, but they're not exactly the same. There is a tiny difference there. There is no such thing as perfection, but there is that reaching towards greater accuracy the whole time. And you see that in the patent books, you see that in Watt going to Hurlingham, and you can see it in Shelley try to make his machine work. The only way to improve efficiency is to become more accurate. They use fewer resources, less fuel, and you know, you take less of what's around you, you leave a smaller footprint. So there is that link, I think, is well as
Yeah. Thank you.
much.
Yo,
Thank
don't go by